From the BBC World Service, in association with ABC and Akashvani, this is Stumped.
Hello, I'm Henry Moran at Edgbaston and welcome to Stumped. I'm joined by the ABC's Jim Maxwell in Sydney and Charu Sharma from Akashvani is in Bangalore. The life of an elite fast bowler can be a hard one. Just ask Jasprit Bumrah or Jofra Archer, both sitting out of the second test of the Tendulkar-Anderson Trophy. India are managing Bumrah's fitness while Archer is back in the England Test squad after an injury-plagued 4 years. We'll start with India and Bumrah. Charu, it's widely known he was only ever going to play in 3 of the test matches of this series, but with India 1-0 down and the gap between the first and second tests 8 days, the longest that there's going to be between any tests in this series, were you perhaps surprised to see India rest him now? What about the reaction to that decision? What's that been like in India?
Well, I'm certainly among the many who are surprised, and you mentioned the 2 most important reasons. One, of course, the fact that India's down 0-1 in the test match, and of course this long rest period between the two. Now, yes, it was said earlier that he might play only 3 of 5. It wasn't a certainty. But I just wonder if there are still niggling physical problems with Bumrah, and that's why he's been forced to stay away from the second test match. The other reason I can think of is the lack of wickets that he collected in the second innings of the first test match. Maybe that was a point or two. That is not 100%. Luckily, India have a few options, and they're not too bad either. I believe Akashdeep, of course, I know is a very accurate bowler, not in the same class as Bumrah. Bumrah is the best in the world. But for India to leave him out at this stage, it really could be a physical, an injury problem that we're not all 100% aware of. Otherwise, to stay without Bumrah and go 2 down in the series, what's the point bringing him back thereafter?
There certainly was some talk that he wanted to play at Lord's, and that I suppose the drama of a Lord's test match would be something that would be a focal point for India and for Bumrah as a man himself. I mean, is there any potential truth in that, do you think?
No, I'm not so sure. And we cannot be going for records and just because Lord's is the kind of ground it is and to get on the Lord's board and such like. I also wonder if there was a sneaky suspicion, or the way they read the pitch here at Edgbaston, that maybe it's a lot more spin-friendly. And if we're going to ask Bumrah to keep breaking his back on a pitch that he might be a little less effective on, then that too may be a reason why they said, all right, we'll make you rest for this test match and come back in the third and perhaps then the fifth. But it doesn't sound very logical, but obviously there's a lot of protection going on because he's a national asset right now, best in the business.
Jim, no matter who you support, as a cricket lover, and you've seen some of the greats from Australia down the years, Thompson, Lilly, Johnson, the list goes on, McGrath, Lee, whoever you want to add to that list. But seeing Jofra Archer back on the cusp of playing test match cricket for the wider game is an exciting thought.
Is hugely exciting if he can get on the park and perform. And you'd have to be a little concerned about his ability, his durability, even when he comes back, which I suppose will be at Lord's. That makes sense. And that's where he did inflict a few blows on the Australians some years ago when he was more in his prime. So let's hope that his body can stand up to whatever is put in front of him, and from here on he's able to play in the Ashes later in the year. But first things first, yes, very exciting to have him there after his elbow problems, his back. He broke his thumb for the IPL. So, yeah, he, like so many of his kind over the years, is a very exciting prospect.
Well, former South Africa fast bowler Vernon Philander has had his own share of injuries over the years. I've been chatting to him about Bumrah, Archer and the realities of being a fast bowler. But first, we started by reflecting on the fact that he's recently turned 40.
Geez, I tell you what, time has flown. It seems like the other day I've left the cricket field when I was only in my early 30s. But the big 40, the naughty 40s, I got reminded on the 24th of June. So, nothing has changed on my side. I still feel like a 28-year-old. So, I wouldn't read too much into being 40.
yours was a career that saw injuries, and as a fast bowler's lot, that tends to be the way. There often are a number of injuries for bowlers. Is that just something you accept? If you play at the high level, you're a fast bowler, you are going to face times on the sidelines because of the exertion that's put on your body.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people refer to workload. I refer to it as stress load. I think, the amount of stress, we put the bodies through, ankles, knees. I think I certainly start to feel a couple of aches and pains now as you grow older. But I think it's something that you make peace with, especially, as a seam bowler, that, injuries are part of your career. I'm still having to hear one bowler that has gone through his career without any injury. So it is part and parcel of the job at the end of the day. But I think the more you can focus on your weak points. I think, these days, there's so much technology available. Obviously, with teams having, biokinetics, physios alongside. So I think in terms of, those workloads that we're talking about, these days there's a lot more, research going into obviously keeping players in the park, but ultimately the amount of cricket that's been played at the moment, unfortunately we're still seeing those high volumes of injuries.
So Jofra Archer returning to England colours, and I think they're clearly desperate to get him back playing again. He's barely played with a red ball in the last 4 years and is being rushed back. I mean, did it surprise you hearing that he was potentially going to be playing Test cricket for England?
I'm twofold when it comes to Jofra Archer selection. I think one, the excitement that it brings to the game. We all know what he can do. He can deliver on the big stage, obviously bowling rapidly. The only concern that I have is exactly what you've pointed out, is the amount of cricket. And that for me, when I spoke about, rewind 10 years back, where your bowling loads was ultimately bowling overs in the nets as opposed to, gym work these days. So that would be the only concern for me. How much time has he had on his legs? How many overs? How many spells? I mean, like we all know, Test match cricket is ultimately about bowling spells. So that would be the only red flag for me. I always talk about reference points. You get to over number 18 and all of a sudden, you need to go and, go into those reserves. Have you done enough work on the legs, to be able to give you that confidence of bowling, 18 plus overs in an inning. So those are all question marks, which you will face at some point in time. Obviously, in a particular test match, obviously, should he be selected? So the excitement of having him around. I think England obviously need an out and out quick, because you always feel that that's perhaps the one set missing, in the armory, in terms of the seam attack. But exciting, and I'm really excited to see him back in, obviously, the colours of England. But like you say, there will be a lot of question marks.
What advice would you give to somebody returning after a spell on the sidelines?
Number one, you're going to have to try and feel your body, and you're going to have to see, and obviously, get a sense of where you're at personally. For me, it is obviously, to try and get there as quickly as possible, and to find out at sort of what medium can you operate at. You'll obviously have to come back for spells later on in the day, but you have to also, eliminate, whatever injuries, concerns you have in the back of your mind, because I think ultimately they can weigh you down. And the last thing you want is, you have a bit of a niggle. I mean, like we all do. And I've played through plenty of niggles in my career, but I think, when you pick up a little niggle in a game, that can be the only concern. How far can you really stretch yourself, with that sort of niggle?
You formed a formidable bowling partnership with Dale Steyn, whose workload was managed quite carefully. AB de Villiers spoke about that. I suppose it takes a lot for a fast bowler psychologically to be aware of the fact they have to rein themselves in, and you have to have teammates around you saying, look, just hold it back a little bit.
Yeah, I think Dale's probably the exception to the case. I think if you look at the way that he's operated with a new ball, operating probably sort of mid 130s, early 140s, but then he really had the ability to step it up. So yeah, exactly what you're talking about. I think it's also understanding his body, understanding his skill set that he brings to the party, and in that way you can manage your way and your workload through the day. So again, I will say it, Jofra Archer, it's important for him to understand, the workload, the intensity, which is going to be operating in, because that's going to be a key element. Of course, when you bring these creeks back, I always call them the Lamborghinis and the Ferraris of the world. So you might see him for a short stint, but you won't see him for long. So it's important, how he manages himself. And I'm pretty sure that the medical team will sit him down, and as well as the coaching staff, and highlight exactly what they need from him.
And then comes the tussle between those that see the value of the win on the field and those that are very aware of the fact that you've got the risk of injury. And Jasprit Bumrah is the name that you think about. We knew ahead of this England Test series that potentially he was going to play 3 of the 5 matches. India lose the first one, and suddenly there is that pressure. Well, where do you try and fit him in? And do you try and overstretch him with the risk that one more big injury could curtail a quite brilliant career, potentially?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to highlight again, when you talk about these quicks, you almost have to put the result out of question. But at the end of the day, it is international sport, and you want to see these guys, operate at their very best. But again, there's so much at risk. I think for me, you look at a Bumrah, you look at a Jofra Archer, and when we talk international cricket, these are the names that you want to see form part of any lineup come, that very first coin being tossed up. So again, I think it's going to be important. Bumrah as well. I mean, there's rumors of, with this extended break that, he's shaping up quite well in terms of his recovery. But again, I mean, I spoke about the workloads. It's important to manage these guys. I think, the 2 names that we busy speaking about, very unique accents. I think, again, if it's a more traditional accent, a bit like Jimmy, of course, the conversation is going to change because, you can stretch Jimmy a little further. But these 2 guys, they're going to bring you, make no mistake, they're going to win you games. They're going to win you matches of cricket. But again, you need to sit down and say, cool, you know what, how far am I willing to stretch these guys, number one, but also how much can the body actually tolerate? And that's important, to get a key understanding from the actual player as to where his body is at. And I think only then can you start forming a plan of actually playing them or resting them. I think also very often for me and my personal capacity, the body will start speaking to you. The body will give you some sort of indication that I'm not up to scratch or I'm not ready, a bit of stiffness, extra stiffness, when you have to wake up, a couple of days out. But yeah, those are key conversations that will have to form part, with both these players obviously playing a massive part, in the rest of this India-England series.
Which brings us on to Australia and the fact that they've managed to somehow keep Stark, Hazelwood and Cummins all going together at the same time. And they look a very different team without those 3. What are they doing to keep these guys fit and fire? It seems remarkable that they've managed that.
Yeah, I think it has to be a combination of obviously research, number one, but more importantly, I think if you look at the amount of cricket that these guys, especially those names, Hazelwood, Stark and Cummins, play, whether it be state cricket back in Australia, they actually put the miles on the legs. So I think one thing that they've done particularly well is keep them on the park, like you've highlighted. But more importantly, I think these guys actually bowl overs. So it's not just a matter of I'm gonna chuck in the gym, do a couple of run throughs. They're actually bowling overs, and that's important for me. Even in today's world, I think where research has obviously shown that a combination between a bit of gym work and bowling is the answer to it. But I do feel, personally speaking, and this is what kept me on the park for a very long period of time, is actually bowling those overs and getting those overs under the belt, because there's so much reference points as a bowler that you have to go through. Like I said, when you start getting tired, understanding your body, how far can I push it, when to start holding back a little bit. So those are all things that you pick up, when you do put a heavy amount of over on your legs. And I think it's important for each and every bowler to understand themselves. I don't think you need a physio to come up to you and tell you you're tired. I think, those are things that you have to identify yourself whilst you're out there. But more importantly, to make that actual call and say, hey, you know what, I'm okay for another 5 overs, or no, I'm hold me back for another 3 or 4 overs of recovery.
That was former South Africa fast bowler Vernon Philander, and that's all we've got time for this week. My thanks to Jim Maxwell and Charu Sharma. Join us again next week. Goodbye.